In 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the January 9th business meeting of the, thank you. Of the Croton Harmon Union Free School District. Action item 1.2, the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 1.3, approval of the agenda. Recommended action be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby approves the agenda as presented.
You
Neil move. Second. On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Moving into reports. Item 2.1, the President's report. Good evening and welcome to the first Board of Education meeting in 2025. Thank you for watching, whether on live stream or later, and thank you to those members of the public here tonight. I want to start by thanking the members of the ad hoc committee working on the proposed equity policy and social media policies who met on the Friday before break at 7:30 a.m. and also thank the members of the administration who came in early for this meeting and were prepared to discuss several policies of significant interest to the public. Some questions have been raised as to the scheduling of this meeting, both as to the date and the time it commenced, with some stating that the meeting was held at the date and time to discourage public participation. To the contrary, I can assure you that was not the case, but rather the meeting, which like all committee meetings is open to the public to observe public work, was scheduled to ensure that the members of the ad hoc committee and the administrators were able to coordinate many schedules to find a time that all could be available during a very busy season. Further, I want to assure the community that the policies discussed during that meeting were not adopted or enacted, but that, like every policy considered for adoption by the board, upon completion of committee work, would then be presented for first and then second reading before adoption. Upon presentation for first reading, and again at second reading, as with any policy, the board will have the opportunity to review the proposed policies and to discuss the proposed policies before voting on them. And members of the public will have full opportunity during the hearing of the public and through other communication channels to the board to let the board know their opinions about the policies that are being proposed for adoption. As for more details, as the work of the ad hoc committee in this regard, we will await an update during board reports at the end of the meeting as an update on this work falls to the chair of the committee, who is Neil Haber. And as with all board policies, inquiries may be made to the superintendent regarding district implementation and to the board with questions or concerns about policies subsequent to adoption. Moving on, I just want to, as a point of clarification, remind the public that the Board of Education is an oversight board. The board establishes policy, but does not have a direct role in operations or in practices or in the implementation of policies adopted by the board. The administration of the district falls to the superintendent and staff. We continue to work on a communication with the community which clarifies these roles and identifies points of contact on particular questions or concerns, which we expect to send out by the end of the month. I also want to recognize that members of our school community have commented on and communicated with the board concerning the ongoing negotiations with the aides of Croton United. As with any bargaining unit, negotiations are between the union representing those employees and the district through its administrators and legal counsel. The board is kept apprised of ongoing discussions, but it is not present and does not participate in contract negotiations. Further, while the board carefully listens to the comments and communications concerning the ongoing ACU negotiations, to protect the integrity of the process, the board will not make any statements about those negotiations. As was discussed at our meeting last month, the subject of participating in the regionalization process is on the board's radar. I want to thank Superintendent Walker for taking the time to discuss regionalization this evening. I look forward to the board discussion which will follow. I also want to thank the athletic department for recognizing our scholar athletes this year and congratulate all of our athletes. We look forward to continued success of our athletic teams during the winter season. And finally, I want to congratulate our seniors who have heard back with early acceptances and announced their future plans. I'm enjoying hearing the announcements of our seniors as they heard back regarding college acceptances and hope that those who are still in the application and consideration process are accepted by the colleges they desire to attend. And for those of our soon-to-be graduates who are embarking on a career path rather than higher education, I hope you are able to connect with a career that meets your goals. But for all, please know that our district and the board are behind you every step of the way. Thank you. And to item 2.2, hearing of the public. The public is allotted 3 minutes, excuse me, to speak. Speakers should state their name and Croton Harmon School District address. All comments must be addressed to the board trustees, and comments about a specific person, staff, student, or Croton Harmon District resident are prohibited. You can approach the podium if you'd like to.
Good evening, my name is Michelle Noah. I'm at 17 Blainberry Road. I'm a resident of Croton and also the founder of PASA, Parents Against School Anti-Semitism. We are a local grassroots organization created by district parents who believe that anti-Semitism or hate of any group has no place in our schools. Tonight, we begin by acknowledging the efforts begun in educating the faculty at CET about the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism. And we look forward to the definition also being shared at the February faculty meetings of BC and the high school, along with the results of the climate survey. Additionally, we've learned that a significant portion of the administrative team will be attending the Westchester Jewish Council session for school district leaders to share resources and ideas on the topic of reducing incidents of bigotry and hate. And we look forward to understanding how the district will be implementing these ideas and resources in the day-to-day operation of our schools and in reducing incidents of bigotry, including anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. We also want to remind you of the 4 PASA recommendations. The first one is specifically a recommendation of policy, and that is to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, incorporate this definition into CHUFSD policies and code of conduct. The definition fits well into the set of definitions already planned for addition to the policy for 105 to clarify anti-Semitism and its representation in the JUSTA IDEA policies, and to consider adding specific language calling for violence against the Jewish community as part of JUSTA's efforts to prioritize a safe learning environment and comply with existing anti-discrimination laws. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Samuels. I'm at 237 Mount Airy Road West. And I'm also a founder of PASA. And just would like to continue along with what Michelle previously said, just put on record what we recommend, and also to thank everybody in this room who has been making some movement on this issue. Their second recommendation is to educate JUSTA, including students, faculty, administration, UE staff and families on the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and its contemporary examples outlined by the IHRA. And to ensure JUSTA community understands and know how to apply this definition so as to comply with Title VI and Executive Order 13899 and to include professional training as needed. Our second under this is to share our website with faculty, staff, and present to teachers at each school. To review and update the planning and management of Culture Night coming up in May 2nd, 2025. And to include specific steps to prevent non-community political voices from manipulating a CHUFSD community event. And this should be applied as needed in each CHUFSD event. And four, to include the past perspective in thinking about the anniversary of October 7th in the following year, and potential date to be had also in early October. Our third recommendation is to create comprehensive systems to improve justice climate and become more fully inclusive. One, to develop and maintain policies, including a centralized and transparent process for reporting and responding to anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. Two, to ensure that diverse perspectives and people, including PASA, but not only PASA, are involved, so decisions and policy making, so that all identities and underrepresented groups can participate, for example, in the hiring and selection of DEI consultant. Three, to include PASA representatives in decisions and conversations around improving justice climate and addressing anti-Semitism and issues surrounding DEI. And the fourth one is something that I personally feel very strongly about. I am a professor at one of the most diverse schools in the country, so I have a lot of experience in this area. To enrich student academics to better prepare for modern day realities. So I want to prepare students with different views and backgrounds to engage with each other, encourage mutual respect, tolerance, stability, and an open learning environment by improving critical thinking, information literacy, and communication skills. And lastly, to promote a richer ethic of pluralism, which encourages greater tolerance of and respect of differences in religion, culture, and national origin. To succeed in promoting tolerance, students would come to understand and value these differences. The last couple of seconds, I would just say, I personally found that once students graduate, it's really important for them to understand the definitions. So IRA definition does not limit discussion or disagreements on a topic. It allows their students to be equipped, so when they get out into the real world, they're not inadvertently discriminating against somebody, and that their words and actions actually match what their feelings are inside. So I think it's a responsibility, maybe not only the anti-Semitism, but to make sure all of our students graduate really understanding these definitions, so their words and actions reflect their true feelings inside. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Morgan Corwin. I live at 124 Pinfield Avenue. I'm in the 8th grade at PUC. And I'm here tonight to support PASA because I'm tired of students thinking they're joking when in reality they are being anti-Semitic. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Eric Weinberg. I am a resident of Croton. I currently live at 12 Georgia Lane, been there for about 10 years. My children are Bennett Weinberg, an 8th grader at PUC, and Juliet Weinberg, a 10th grader at Croton Harmon High School. I am here to support PASA as well. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my evolution as a Jew. I am the grandson of Holocaust survivors. Approximately 1/4 of my family tree no longer exists, including almost all members of my grandparents' families. My grandmother's family was wiped out in Auschwitz, and my father's family was killed in my grandfather's family was killed in the Polish resistance. My grandmother had tattooed numbers on her arm, which always freaked me out as a kid. I always wondered why she never covered them up, and now I am beginning to understand why. Until recently, I always felt safe in this country. Until October 7th, unfortunately, and the dramatic increase in anti-Semitic events since that time. According to FBI data, Jews are the most frequent victims of religiously motivated hate crimes in the United States. Unfortunately, both of my children have experienced moments of both subtle and outright anti-Semitism in our community. I'm here in support of PASA and the 4 recommendations that have been proposed. I will not repeat them because you guys have heard them already. In regard to the last one, including curriculum practicing civil discourse on challenging topics, I would like the children of this community to understand that many seemingly contrary opinions can be held by the same person. For example, I can fervently defend the right of Israel to exist. I and many other Jews can be highly critical of the current Israeli administration. I and many other Jews believe Palestinians deserve a sovereign state. I and many other Jews can be highly critical of Hamas and what they have done to the Palestinian and Israeli people. We need our children to learn these skills, and they are currently not being taught. I need my children to feel accepted and heard, just like all other marginalized groups in Croton. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Katja Bloomberg, 13 Cleveland Drive, and a lot has been said. I myself and my kids have witnessed anti-Semitism in this district, so I'm here to support process message. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jed Riley, should Jed Riley. I wish everybody a happy new year. Hope they had a Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. I wish you and your families well, although we may disagree, maybe I won't get fired. That's Jed. I'd like to agree with the prominent speakers that the policies that are proposed and will be voted on by this group as a whole. The diversity policies stink. It's terrible. Some of the people on the committee were the wrong people to be on the committee because of their past history themselves. I'd like to point to a couple of things. One, the headline of today's newspaper says that we used to be one of the most prestigious colleges, Sarah Lawrence, is being sued because of anti-Semitism, what they allowed to have on campus. That the current minority leader of the House of Representatives, his uncle, a Sunni professor, accused Jews of being behind the slave trade, which is historically impossible. But he proposed it as a professor, and a lot of other professors have done the same. A lot of students have done the same. Those students came to my school somewhere. Didn't pop out of nowhere. So it's a serious issue. Should have been addressed in your diversity policy, but it's a terrible policy to begin with. I'd like to touch on one other thing. There's as of today, it's Kentucky's federal court decision that has thrown out Biden's Title IX provisions regarding bathrooms, girls' locker rooms, and teams, which has been the impetus behind the idea to put transgender boys on girls' teams. And before the Supreme Court, this is critical. This has always been the excuse, and this board has used this as an excuse. Before the Supreme Court, the question of 9 judges, the groups that opposed this law in Tennessee said there is no increase in suicide between a self-described transgender person, whether they receive drugs and or surgery, or they do not, and are treated with the mental health consultations that they require before the Supreme Court of the United States. Suicide is one of the primary hammers or sword of Damocles that so-called healthcare professionals, which have ruined their reputation over the last 5 years, they don't have a good reputation, have used to hold over parents to drive them to these butcher shops in Boston, to these hospitals in Vanderbilt, St. Louis, and elsewhere. So I would like that part of the record. And you should adjust your thinking as opposed in terms of gender affirming policies that you have discussed in the past. I'm going to address that later, and have some written policies that affect thinking.
Thank you. Anyone else? We'll close hearing of the public and move on to item 2.3, superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ron. Good evening, everyone. It's always one of the great parts of my job at these meetings is to get a chance to share some of the phenomenal things that have occurred in our schools since the last time we were together at a business meeting. So I want to begin with that, and then we'll close with a few slides on regionalization and look forward to the board's discussion and questions on that topic at that point. I don't have any jokes, Greg, so there you go. All right. So starting with the PVC winter concert. John and I had a chance to attend this together. We always are amazed by the incredible quality of the musicianship of our young people, particularly considering how few years they've had at that point to learn that particular instrument and to perform together. The quality of the sound from beginning to end across the orchestra, the band, the chorus is the jazz band truly exceptional. There was no different this year. So congratulations and thank you to Ms. Dwyer, Mr. Katzman, Mr. Bryant, and all of our student musicians for what was an outstanding winter concert at PVC. Also want to make a quick mention of one of the fun pre-winter break activities every year at CET. We get a chance to get invited as a district office team to come over to Ms. Shapiro, Ms. Baron's class in 4th grade and hear from the Tigers who have participated in their cake decorating contest. So students work in groups. Come up with some really elaborate themes and decorations. Some had dance routines and songs they had made up that aligned with their themes around their particular cakes. So just a really kind of fun example of kids enjoying each other, collaborating together, creating something together, and then sharing it with adults and with colleagues. And so thank you to those kids and to their teachers for some good laughs and some really interesting cake decorating, no doubt about it. Also want to make mention of any number of our student athletes and teams, beginning with our scholar athlete teams as on the reference from the fall, and the 114 scholar athletes from the fall. It's a phenomenal group and represent kind of everything that's great about our schools and the product that our schools produce. Students who are high achieving and excellent and curious and inquisitive about the world, passionate about the world in the classroom, and also contribute to the community in the field of play. So congratulations to all of them. I wanted to congratulate Henry Martin, who recently won his 100th wrestling match. Remarkable. It's a phenomenal young man who is an exceptional wrestling talent. I'm sure we'll see him at the state meet again this year. So congratulations to him and to Coach Uccello. Also want to make mention and thank Christine and Carla and everyone who's involved in facilitating the annual Maitland tournament. I had a chance to attend the games Thursday night and Friday night. I think it was Friday night, the boys game. That was the loudest I've heard the gym in the 3 years I've been here. I think when Vinny Flynn hit that 3-pointer and we beat North Salem that night, that was a really, really great night, not only for the team, but just for the program, kind of the morale of the entire athletic department. So thank you to Coach Lucas, to Coach Marcucci, to everyone who's involved in all those games. Really a phenomenal tournament. The girls won the tournament, boys came in second. So a lot of Tiger pride on display that weekend. Also want to mention and congratulate again Gwen McManus, who we talked about previously, with possibly the all-state soccer team. I was surprised to no one, but that again is an exceptional young person who combines talent with great work ethic and incredibly proud of her accomplishments. So congratulations to Gwen as well. Shifting to the arts, we wanted to congratulate and thank Marlena Horton and the CET chorus who had a chance to perform. We talk a lot about school being a place where kids get a chance to make memories that they'll remember the rest of their lives. And I think certainly the chance for the 4th grade chorus to perform at West Point and at Radio City are examples of that. John and I had a chance to go down to the city that day and watch our 4th graders, I'd say anxious, right? Perhaps a little beyond anxious, but sounded just tremendous, and just the pride of all the parents who were there to get a chance to watch their child perform on a stage like that in an environment like that before the Christmas spectacular. It was a beautiful, beautiful day for us, and congratulations and thank you to them and from Marlena, who's just a dynamo in that program. Also want to make mention and give a shout out to our 5th grade faculty and 5th grade PVC students who took part in the annual fifth grade stores, right? This happens twice a year. Well timed, this is before the winter break, and so our students, it's part of an interdisciplinary experience that helps them to learn about decimals and apply that knowledge in some kind of real world context where they pick a product or a service they're interested in. It might be making bracelets, jewelry, or stickers, or other kind of holiday themed items. They then determine a market price and a market value for them, and they get a chance to present them. So they deal with concepts like inventory, accounts payable, price listing. So actually, if we need help in the business office, we've got some good fifth graders ready for that. And then they get a chance to present and share their knowledge. So that's always an incredibly fun experience. We look forward to that again in the spring. So thank you to them for sharing their interests and talents with us. And thank you to those fifth grade teachers for making that happen. Next up is the annual clothing swap. This is the Activism Club. Thank you to Carrie Tracy at the high school. I think this year there are about 30 students who were present. A phenomenal example of environmental consciousness and some collaboration and people kind of upcycling their wardrobe in a very conscious way. So always a fun event. Didn't get a chance to attend this year, but have in the past. It's always an excellent opportunity for our kids to do some learning together. So thank you to Carrie and the Activism Club for that opportunity. I wanted to make mention of this. This is something I hadn't talked about in prior years, but had a chance to experience this year as I have in my integrated chat group. One of the things I had heard about is kind of a special tradition at CHHS is every year in chat, our ninth graders take one of the sessions and write letters to their future selves. And they're asked to think about themselves as seniors and what they want their high school experience to have been about, what they want to have gone through, experienced feelings of success, struggle, whatever it is they want to share with their future selves. It's done entirely confidentially. But I want to say my chat group, shout out to my chat group, really did an excellent job. They're thoughtful about it. And it's one of those moments when you talk to seniors, they remember and get a chance to open those letters and reflect on their CHHS experience. So it's a unique thing. I haven't seen that at other high schools. So I wanted to make mention of that and to my chat group and thank them for being so thoughtful, and I look forward to 4 years from now, seeing what their experience has been like. One of the things that the board and community has heard about for some time is the idea through the vision map of leveraging school schedules to establish further innovation around the student experience. And so I want to make mention of something that will be happening for the first time beginning at the end of this month at CET called Tiger Day. And actually Carrie and Craig, along with some faculty, put together a video that was shared yesterday with our CET families and a survey in anticipation of a parent meeting on this next week. But the general idea is that the day will start for all students at CET with a building-wide assembly. So think about 550 young people in the same space at the same time, engaging in activities together, learning together. And while that's happening, the rest of the faculty and staff have that 45 minutes or so to collaborate together. And so think about what the potential is of that kind of interdisciplinary collaboration, and the rest of the day, the entire schedule is opened up in terms of prep periods for teachers, so that you can have some incredible multi-grade, multi-age, interdisciplinary, cross-special area collaboration. This again is something I've never seen before. Came out of some really good thinking by the faculty and staff there, in alignment with the vision map. It's something Carrie and Craig were very proud of conceptually when the board first heard about it in August, and now we'll get a chance to experience it starting in January. And actually, the district office has been slated for a couple of days this spring. So again, you guys are just planning entertaining 600 elementary school students. It's going to be a task. So just want to put that on everybody's radar. We look forward to having Carrie and Craig back soon this spring to talk about how that's going. And certainly we'll be sharing more information with on that as it gets on. Now shifting wildly to an entirely different topic, that of regionalization. So just to give a little bit of background in anticipation of a board discussion around this. This is not a Croton initiative. This is instead a state initiative coming out of the State Education Department in Albany. One of the things that lends it, in my mind, credibility is that it comes and is led by Commissioner Rosa, a leader whose vision and whose leadership in general is one that we have tremendous respect for. And while maybe not in our district, there are certainly parts of the state where this has driven a lot of conversation. Long Island particularly, some places in our state particularly, but essentially, what I've tried to do in the next couple of slides, and this all comes directly from the SED website, for those of you who haven't been regularly reading SED.gov, is to give kind of an overview, starting with what this is and what it isn't. Because there has been certainly a fair amount of misinformation, I think, about the concept. So it's not a surprise to anyone in education that districts regularly collaborate with each other, and we're in touch with each other. We think through ideas. We share at every superintendent's meeting, every assistant superintendent's meeting, the projects we're working on, the priorities we're working on, and how we might connect with each other. And so in my mind, this is an extension of that, and potentially a furtherance of that, because what it does is incentivize these sort of conversations through SED support. That's not just financially, but through advocacy for potential changes in legislation or regulation that in some cases restrict what districts would like to be doing together now. And so at its core, in my mind, that's what the commissioner's vision is a way to try to incentivize districts to continue to collaborate, to potentially to find efficiencies. But in my mind, it's mostly about how can we work together to lift each other up in systems, and in doing so, lift up the experience of all students within our region. What it isn't, and certainly I think FD would admit there were some lapses, some mistakes in how this was initially communicated. And we've been candid with SED about that. What it isn't is discussion of mergers or consolidations or mandating districts to do anything. So to me, that's a key part of this. Is it's a nothing ventured, nothing gained kind of concept, where there is no requirement that districts participate, and if districts do participate, that there's no mandate that we actually do anything if the direction of the regional conversations isn't one that we're particularly interested in as growth. In terms of the outcome, as shared by SED, we're really talking about kind of two things. The first is what they're calling regional plans, and this will be led by Northern Westchester BOCES District Superintendent Neil Boyle, who will bring together all the superintendents of participating districts in the region to talk through what our potential priorities are, what our areas of work, and to develop what could be plans as an entire region, plans as 2 or 3 districts in the region, or some combination thereof, of how it is we want to go about working together. That might mean engaging in shared research, sharing of practices, sharing of resources or professional learning opportunities. And so that's kind of that's where the meat on the bones is what those conversations would sound like and what the kind of the fruit of that labor would be. And then the second part of a series of recommendations that would be made on behalf of the region to the state education department around, for us to continue this work, for us to do the kinds of things that we would like to do, we need the following: changes in regulation, changes in legislation, financial support. And so those are really the 2 aspects of what would come out of this process. And again, this is the way that SEDs describe this: the regional activity plan, what we've agreed to work on together that are, in their words, and I have no reason not to believe this, completely identified and generated by the districts themselves. And then what we need, we want the folks in Albany to continue pursuing if we had additional resources, legislative changes, for regulatory changes. And so this is an opt-out mechanism at this point. And so what all districts were asked to do was to complete a needs assessment, which was fairly onerous. Mostly information that was already accessible publicly, kind of condensed into one 43 or 44 page document. And so the idea, as I understand it, was for the state education department to then take every district in the region's needs assessment and consolidate them and find a way to see if there's some overlap that might help to drive some of the conversations around what some priority areas might be when the districts come together. I've spoken fairly extensively with Neil Boyle at BOCES about this. He's let me know that at this point, his understanding is that at least 18, if not all 19 of the districts in the region will participate preliminarily. That's my recommendation, is that we see where this goes. There's no, again, there's no obligation for us to engage in anything. If there was ever a point at which we thought, well, we'd like to partner with Briarcliff and North Salem on following work around interdisciplinary course design and research, then that would come through kind of a formal plan that would come to the board for discussion and consideration. So we're talking about something that's months, if not years off. The requirement, just in terms of the timeline, so that folks have a sense, is that the districts will first start to come together in late February or March for the first time. There'll be discussion. We get together all the time anyway, but this will be more focused around this topic and facilitated by Neil Boyle. The requirement from SED is that any actual plan is put together and submitted by October 1st of 2025 and implemented at the start of the 26-27 school year. All of these things, of course, are, I would assume, subject to change, but that's what SED has laid out at this point. So I think from our end, as I would think about going into these meetings, our priorities would be based around the vision map. Right? The work we're doing here that we already see as innovative for students here and staff here, getting a chance to share some of that, hear from other districts about where there may be some overlap and some interest in similar work, and then seeing if there's a potential for a partnership that would allow us then to say to SED, we can take this work even further if you can help us in the following ways. And I think, again, that's really the difference is we've always collaborated. Right? Share codes, share resources, and share ideas, and share professional learning concepts and research. And we do intervisitations of other districts all the time. Right? That's not a novel concept. The difference potentially is the backing of the state education department legislatively, in terms of advocacy, and financially, that could help us potentially to do some of this work at a deeper level, at a more expedited level than we could do on our own. And if nothing comes of it that's interesting, it's an opportunity for us to get together as colleagues and have some good, rich discussions anyway. So our recommendation is we initially participate. We see where this goes, and obviously every time after there's a meeting, I'll come back to the board and to the public and share what the nature of the conversations are. The little kind of broad overview of regionalization, happy to answer questions where to hear from the board in terms of discussion. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. I think we'll move into item 2.4, which is discussion surrounding regionalization. So we can now start.
If nobody else wants to.
You can start.
I'll start. So, I've actually been doing a fair amount of reading and studying on this, thinking both about what the obligations and demands are on participating districts. And I've looked at the opposition of those districts that have opted out. Mainly in Long Island, and some of them have posted their materials on their website, which I have copies here of some of them. The first thing that I know is that, as Steve said, the rollout was not. The rollout was not particularly well thought out with certain things like terminology. In New Jersey, regionalization means exactly what some people, some people were scared of. Regionalization in New Jersey means combining school districts or combining high schools, when New Jersey has, for a particular county, a regional high school. That's not what this is about, but by using that term, immediately people got scared. And I think it's pretty clear that that's not what it means. I looked at some of the material. I actually watched this afternoon a presentation by Tom Rogers, that he presented to his board in November, I think it was, in which he talked about the authority of the state to oversee education, the regulations as they were in draft form as of November, the desire that he saw on behalf of his district, SIOSA, which is a high-performing district in Long Island, for the regionalization to be, if you will, voluntary and not mandatory. And some things that he wanted to see changed in those regulations. After his presentation, SED said, you may opt out, and put in the regulation that you may opt out in participating in the planning process. What they did not do in the regulation is specifically say that you may opt out of the implementation. At the town hall with Commissioner Rosa and Deputy Commissioner Madison and Assistant Commissioner Frank that some of us attended on December 12th, they discussed that and they said, no, we don't mean that you must do anything. Even if you participate in the planning process, you don't have to follow any recommendations, even in those items that are going to be submitted as a report to SED. That's not what the regulations say, but that's what they said. And one of the things that that Superintendent Rogers said is, if you look at the authorities of the school district to run the school district under education law, and look at all of those statements that were made, it would be very difficult for the commissioner to say, you violated the law because you ran your district in accordance with education law section 1709 for union-free school districts. So then I get back to, what does this really do for us, and how does it, what impediments or burdens is? But I think the burdens are slight. It's some time, it's some thinking, it's some spending time at meetings that maybe we didn't really want to have our administrators, have to add to their schedule. But my impression during my service on the board is that the cooperation and interchange between districts and administration, superintendents and administrative staff and principal is somewhat ad hoc. We have an idea, we hear that somebody in Long Island or somebody in another part of the county or wherever is doing something that sounds good, and we call them, we say, yeah, maybe we'll come visit you. That's a little bit different than actually working together, to use the elbow to elbow phrase that our superintendent likes to use.
Thanks, sir.
I think that it is important for us, even in our community, to participate, both because we will be helping our neighboring districts and other districts who might benefit from our experiences, and we will be able to benefit from theirs. I know there's a lot of, at the town hall, Commissioner Rosa called out our neighboring districts, Peekskill, Ossining, and Tarrytown, and their superintendents for working together on a lot of very innovative things for their particular populations and their particular needs that I think we could learn from. And that's what I see here. I would hate it if it ended up that the commissioner tried to, put the thumb down and say, you must do this. But I don't think that's going to happen. And I am very much positive towards this initiative and where it can take us to help our students.
Thank you,
And I do have some materials if anybody wants to look at them.
thank you.
Yeah, it would be great if we could share those, thank you.
Mhm.
And just, oh, you wanna go first? No, I wanted to just quickly, I've been following along with this, as it's been going along, through a lot of the work. That I do with LHEC and Westput as well. And having attended the town hall with Commissioner Rosa, and understanding, I think getting a better understanding of sort of what the idea behind it is and what the potential is, for the district. I'm pleased that we are just making, that our administration is making the recommendation that we participate, when we see where things could go with that, because I do think that at that point, right, there isn't, it's sort of a no loss situation, right? I do thank you for the time, and I'm sure owner's effort of putting together the needs assessment. Because I understand a lot of that data is stuff that is already reported out in a lot of different ways, and so having to recalibrate all of that stuff manually is certainly an effort, so thank you all for that. But I'm curious and I'm looking forward to see how this moves forward in ways, after you have this meeting in February or March, with our regional counterparts and seeing what ideas kind of float up from there and what the opportunities are. Thank you.
Yeah, like when we talked about this initially at the advocacy committee meeting, it was still before the clarification, I think it was late November, that the commissioner sent on sort of the question of the mandatoriness of regionalization and the concept here. And so there was some concern from in our conversation about what does it mean, right, for the district? Are we required? What does it mean to be required to share it, et cetera? So I'm glad that there's been clarification and an improvement on communication on their part on all of that. And I mean, I think it makes sense the way that it's been laid out, and I think collaboration is always a good thing, right? Even if, to your point, it ends up not going to the full extent that you imagined it would. I think having conversation with districts, innovating together and exploring together is a good thing for our district and neighboring districts. One question I had, and I know that potentially the additional resources piece, legislative changes or regulatory changes. I'm interested in the additional resources piece because I assume that they might be financial, though not necessarily financial resources, right? And there will be a moment, right, when you're exploring with other districts where you're going to want the information about how possible additional resources may be so that you can continue in the endeavor, right, of exploration. And I guess I wonder about at what point, and this is probably not an answer you have already, but something that I think we're going to want at some point is how are decisions on additional resources being made, right? And because I think that information will be necessary at a certain point where you decide, all right, this is something we want to explore, but we can't do it without X, Y, and Z, right? So how is that X, Y, and Z determined? And then my second question or point is around your priority around the vision map. If you've already seen alignment with other districts in kind of the concepts of the vision map, where you think you want to at least explore initially with them because of that alignment.
For me to respond. So on the resources question, I think that's, that you've hit the nail on the head, right? And so I think part of what I'm optimistic about is the connection through Neil Boyle as the district superintendent and as and statutorily as Commissioner Rosa's representative to our region. When we say resources, we certainly think about financial resources, but we also think about SED expertise and attention and time. And so it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise to anyone that SED is not incredibly well staffed. And so when you're trying to give an example, when we were trying to put together the interdisciplinary courses at the high school, one of the questions that needed to get answered was, can you issue credit in both areas when you're combining curricula like that. And believe it or not, because no one else is really doing it, that's not a question that is readily answerable at SED. Laura, because she's Laura, hunted down somebody at SED to get that answer. But the ability to get attention to our questions and focus on some of the things we'd like to do from SED is a resource that's frankly as valuable to us potentially as the financial side. And so we would look to Neil to help to keep his finger on the scale with Commissioner Rosa to make sure that those things are happening. Remind me of the second question.
Just where you see alignment.
Oh,
with,
yes. So I think one of the areas that we'd be really interested in is conversations around innovative assessment practices. And so that's a conversation that comes up whenever we're together regionally in general. But if there's an opportunity to do some partnering with districts to do some kind of action research, supported potentially by SED in some way, I think that's going to be particularly with the Blue Ribbon Commission's recommendations and the changes that are happening statewide anyway. I would think that, without wanting to speak for Albany, that would be something they'd want districts to be prioritizing and collaborating around. And so we're in a position to help lead that with some, we think, really good regional partners as well.
Thanks.
I'll just chime in and say one of the things, Steve, that you mentioned, I think also sounds pretty interesting is just the opportunity to use this regionalization structure in supportive advocacy. Because I think, again, just as we're thinking about, you know, how education continues to develop and change and what the outlook is in terms of policy changes and things like that in the coming years. I certainly think that having those conversations with other school districts and being able to sort of present a collective perspective from like a position of strength. As we've seen, it's like we have seen, you know, school districts across our state even sort of advocate for legislative kind of like change. And I think it's an opportunity for us that we haven't taken advantage of in a structured way. Where, you know, again, I hate to go back to like the Long Island example, but we have seen it there. And I think there's opportunity for us here also to be moving some of our policy thinking forward through this structure. So that seems pretty compelling as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to quote John, and I know John probably a half a dozen times in the 3 years we've spent together has said, think about what the potential impact would be if even the 62 Westchester districts came together around a particular topic and said, we need to move toward this change in education, kind of harnessing that potential around advocacy in a region like ours is fantastic to think about. Right? And so this gives us at least an opportunity potentially to have some of those conversations backed by support from SED in a way that hasn't been, as you said, harnessed or channeled before. So that's incredibly interesting to us too.
Good, glad to hear it.
I captured that.
I just have a kind of a point of interest, like with respect to the needs assessment, was there information that we don't already give SED, or was it just a different compilation that they were looking for?
No, it's information that's already publicly available, packaged differently, and that was one of the,
Is that
I will
the
say,
time, the time and energy to
well,
put that together?
yeah, and to Neil's point, it was, yeah, it was initially communicated and packaged very poorly. The commissioner sent a couple of her deputies down to meet with the regional superintendents in, I think it was late November. And I'll say that meeting went very poorly for the deputies, right? You ask us for candid feedback, you're gonna get it. And part of it was that aspect of the initial rollout was terribly done, right? They asked us to put together information that you could go to sed.gov and get already. And so that irritated us and we let them know that, but I think frankly, the direction of these conversations isn't going to be guided necessarily by that specific needs assessment. It's going to be guided by things like the vision map and the strategic plan, the vision of the region's schools, and how we can find areas of commonality together. But yeah, we were irked by that. Yeah.
I would just add that for other parts of the state, rural areas, and I read some of the articles and postings about rural areas in the Catskills and Adirondacks and so on. The needs assessment, I'm sure, was a very vital point because it helped them identify the ways in which school districts and share resources, share administrators, share programs, share teachers that they really, had not thought about, and for them, it probably was much more useful than perhaps it was here where, we we had a better sense of where we are. But I guess from the state's perspective, they couldn't really make a distinction between, in Westchester line, you don't have to do this because you kind of know, but, other places you do. So I think, but I also think what you talked about was the needs assessment for our communities is really not something that's going to be, is going to drive discussion going forward. It's what's going to drive it is getting everybody together and saying, these are the things we're doing. Well, what are you doing? How does that tie in? And how can you also connect perhaps with schools or districts outside of our area that we may not have thought about? We hear about them sometimes, like when we go to NISBA and we hear somebody do a presentation and, there's some ideas and maybe we reach out, but I think a more systemized approach and through the district superintendents of the 37 BOCES, who also get together every month and talk about things, a lot of innovation can come and a lot of resources we will be able to, not our district alone, but our area will be able to utilize as I see it conceptually.
Josh?
So, Steve, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how is this coming together as a region going to work in the face of the existence of districts that have historically been somewhat iconoclastic? We all know who they are.
Yeah.
And depending on the dimension that you're talking about, they may be iconoclastic in different ways. They may be iconoclastic in terms of their budgets are very different. What it takes to pass or not pass a budget may be very different in those communities. What they choose to spend money on, what they choose to focus on, what they choose to not focus on or ignore. And historically, that's led to a sort of impedance mismatch in many of our efforts to work together as multiple districts. I wonder if you had any thoughts about that. I mean, we've seen that kind of I don't want to say the word disagreement's not really the right word, but a difference in approach along the lines of many different things. Like one that comes to mind is on participation in state testing, for instance, was a big thing about, I want to say about 7-8 years ago, right? And there were some districts that said, no, you don't really want to do that, or participate to varying degrees. I wonder if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think I agree, and certainly we know who those districts are, and I've close relationships with the superintendents in many of those districts, and we have those kind of conversations. I think what interests me about this opportunity is that it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all entirely regional plan, where all 19 districts are looking to focus on this issue. The idea of being able to partner with 2 or 3 districts to the point made previously, Austin, Peekskill, Terrytown, Triad, that kind of opportunity for us with other districts. Because there are a lot of districts in our region and outside of our region who are similarly inclined to think about, to use our term, what school can be. There are a lot of kindred spirits out there. And so they don't necessarily have to be all 19 of us, and they're never, it's never going to line up all 19 of us on an issue. But the chance to work on it with a smaller subset of districts on issues that are of interest to us, to our student bodies, to our communities, that I think is what's interesting to me in terms of the planning and implementation part, and then the opportunity to Anama's point about advocating more broadly as a region. I think it kind of checks both of those boxes potentially.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So we asked this to be put on the agenda because we had mentioned it at our last board meeting. I think it's important that we have these conversations, in public and, have an opportunity to take Steve's brain and hear the district's perspective on why decisions are being made. So I want to thank everyone for participating in this. And thank you, Steve, for presenting on it.
We look forward to keeping you posted.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 2.5, the student exit this year trustee report. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Before I start my report, I just want to touch on Mr. Walker's point. With the clothing swap, I was able to attend. It's probably one of my favorite events of the year. It's just really cool to see students collaborating and like getting to know each other across grades, and so it's a great event. So if you guys can attend next year, I highly recommend.
So do we have to like bring clothes to
I
share?
mean, if you want, I think it's just everyone can go for the fun. I know some of my friends didn't bring stuff, but I definitely did, and we just kind of had fun with it, which is great. Moving on, this one really excites me because I am a senior, but we will learn our Choose Mentor placements during chat next Monday. Okay, so the Choose program allows students to do internships or things of that sort during the fourth quarter of their senior year. So we'll start organizing that with their mentors once we find them out on Monday. The CHUFSD winter concert will be on Thursday, January 23rd at 7 p.m. So if you can attend, I'm sure everyone would love the music. Like everyone's working really hard on it. Auditions for the spring drama will be held Monday to Wednesday next week. The production is the Laramie Project, which will run from April 4th to April 5th. And I believe it'll be at CHHS if the auditorium is all done by then. And SFC will meet tomorrow morning.
We all did this.
Yes, yes. So SFC will meet tomorrow morning just to discuss a couple initiatives like the PAVE program, which we're starting, which is basically students in a grade will record a video with just ideas and like information about their experience living in that grade, and then that will be shared with students in the grade below that are rising to be their level, and just to kind of give them an idea of what they should expect in the future. And we're also trying to plan our 100-year celebration for the anniversary of the school's 100 years since the building. I love it. It's kind of like a big birthday party, so I'm really excited for that one. And on more technical terms, the wing over there, which used to be the language wing, is now closed off. So a lot of students are switching their classroom placements and kind of adjusting with that. Navigating the hall with one less staircase is pretty hard, but I haven't run into the wall yet, so it's going pretty good. And it's really exciting to be part of this transformation, and I'm pretty sad that I won't get to see it. But I think when I come back after I graduate, I'll be really excited. That's everything.
We have some insight. Mentors, I think you're gonna be.
I just wanted to add one thing, and I heard that SFC is working on their 100th birthday celebration. As I've said to the board over the years, and I've said to staff, administration as well, as everybody has a passion project, I have defined my passion project as having a community celebration. I don't want to at all take away from what SFC is doing, but of the 100th anniversary, I have started, I guess I can make this announcement publicly, to reach out to members of our community who may have memorabilia from their high school career up in the attic, going back as far as they may have from their parents, grandparents, whatever, so that we can sometime, probably unfortunately after you graduated, Isabel, but maybe you come back, have a community celebration, perhaps tie it in with something with a new Spencer Field with lights, etc. But I'm not sure exactly how it's gonna go.
Fireworks.
I know, like,
But whatever we can do, and I'm just saying that's, you know, SFC's passion, I think, is great. Their project, passion project, right? But I'm hoping that we can put it together. So if anyone, and this is for the public, goes up in the attic and or in the basement and finds stuff, let me know. I probably can find room in my garage, drop it off. The car doesn't go in the garage, and I'd be glad to, kind of help this along.
Suzanne's gonna kill you.
Yeah, I know she,
She hasn't yet.
That's just
That's fair point. That's how he's telling Suzanne as well.
Thank you, Isabel, and we hope you do come back and you get to
I
see the
will,
meeting,
definitely for that, definitely come back.
and definitely for one of these board meetings, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You come back.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we now will move on to item 2.6, the Assistant Superintendent for Business Report.
Presentation. So tonight is the first in our series of budget presentations for 25-26. And I'll just wait a moment until we pull that out. Greg's getting steps in tonight.
Question.
This would be a good time for superintendent to say anything.
So we're going to begin with the budget development timeline. Oh, see, I don't seem to be there, so.
Might be slightly delayed.
Oh, boy.
There you go.
This could be a long night.
Should I just hit the button?
Yeah. So this is a year-long process. Budget development is starting in September, where we develop preliminary assumptions, we analyze some historical data, and begin to develop forecasts. Take a look at the political and financial landscape in making those forecasts. And then then in October, we create our budget development timeline and calendar, and we look at our state aid and debt projections. In November, we start establishing partnerships with the building leaders and directors and administrators, and we engaging in the process of talking about goals, priorities, et cetera. December is where our building leaders come together. We dialogue about their priorities, we evaluate options, and we actually look at existing programs, determine how effective are they, are they something we want to move forward or want to put on pause for a little bit until we have further evaluations. And I'm gonna hit my button. And then in January, the governor's tentative budget comes out, hopefully. And that will give us guidelines for the state aid funding that we expect to receive. And today we'll have our initial budget discussion. Okay, or maybe my battery. Oh, it's growing. Here we go. Okay. Then in February, we have another budget work session. We receive the New York State, that acronym down at the bottom. Greg, are we able to move that?
Yes.
Okay. The New York State Teachers Retirement System releases their employer contribution rate. So as a public employer, we're obligated to contribute a percentage of their salaries to the retirement fund. That information usually comes out in February. We also, at that point, we usually issue a spending moratorium to our staff so that we could stop the spending, take a look at our year-to-date expenses, our future obligations, and then determine if we're going to keep that in place or move forward with the balance of the year in spending. Then in March, We submit our allowable tax levy. That is submitted to the Office of the State Controller. It basically says that based on our projections and the prescribed formula, we are anticipating a tax levy of a certain amount, and that has to be authorized by the Controller's Office. We will also present our budget and bus propositions, transportation propositions. Oh, now we're moving, Greg, thank you. In April, we'll ideally have the governor's budget and state aid will be secured so that we can begin to adopt our budget and submit the property tax report card. We'll also have our public budget hearing in May, along with our vote, which this year is on May 20th. And that will be at the high school. Crazy year. 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. at the high school. So we're going to begin with looking at our revenue assumptions. We generally look at revenues first because we don't have a lot of opportunities to create revenue. It's kind of like we have what we have. So we begin by looking at state aid. A big portion of state aid is foundation aid. Last year, the legislature and the governor got together and they commissioned the Rockefeller Institute to evaluate the foundation aid formula, which was established in like 2007. I think that's the basis of our figures. So the Institute got together, they formulated a group of recommendations. New York is a very complex state with a wide variety of school districts, demographically, size-wise. There's no one fix for this. It's a very complex, nuanced situation where one thing could send one district into financial ruins and send another district in, into a flood of state aid revenue. So though the report is very valuable, I believe, according to NISBA and NISCUS, I think they are going to dive deeper into some of the recommendations, maybe looking at the wealth ratios and enrollment and so forth. But the word on the street is that we are holding steady with foundation aid as is. NISBA is also recommending that our expense-based aids, so those are aids that are generated based on the expenditures that we have for that year, transportation aid, building aid, special ed, expenses. That's all I can think of off the top of my head. So they are recommending that those aid formulas stay as is and dollar for dollar reimbursement. And for our district, we're expecting that foundation aid will remain stable for this year. And we anticipate increases in our building aid and transportation aid based on projects being finalized and also just increased expenditures in transportation. So just for perspective purposes, state aid represents about 15% of our revenue. Then we have our tax levy. So the allowable growth factor is a component of the formula. And the allowable growth factor that we're anticipating is 2%. So that's essentially CPI or 2%, whichever is lower. Right now, CPI is about 2.99%. That's the lowest it's been since 2022, maybe 2021. I think January of 22, it was a little over 2%, and now it's again the lowest since then. But we expect that it's not going to go below the 2%. So we think that we can, reasonably rely on that. The tax-based growth factor, that represents brick and mortar development within our community. This year, so that rate comes out by the property tax division of the state. That number changes. Not that much. I've seen it change 3 times over the course of the budget process, and I've seen it given once and never changed again. Right now, we're projecting 1.004, which is a reduction from last year, which was at 1.0059. So it's a small difference, but still a reduction. And that increase is added on to our levy to offset some of the growth in that area. Not a significant amount, it's a very small amount in our tax levy, as you'll see on our next budget presentation. Westchester County sales tax and income. So Westchester County provides districts with a percentage of their sales tax revenue. This number has increased substantially. We expected that during COVID that was going to decline significantly, and it actually didn't. So we receive about 2% of our revenue from Westchester County sales tax and interest income. We are expecting interest income to go down this year based on, interest rates, inflation, et cetera. Here we go with expenditure assumptions. So some of our assumptions looking forward into the budget season, certainly we have our contractual personnel wage and benefit increases. We have obligations to our collective bargaining agreements, et cetera. That is a large portion of our budget. It represents 50% of our budget. It reflects salaries. Next, we have health and dental and insurance increases. So the consortium is expecting an increase between 3.9 and 4.5%, which, considering the environment, is very, very reasonable in comparison to some of the surrounding plans, NISHIP, SWISHCHIP, et cetera. Employer pension contributions and payroll taxes. So as a public employer, we pay ERS to our non-certified, then we pay employee, I can use the acronyms, I promised myself I would. The employee retirement system, we pay a percentage of the salaries for those employees. That is going up considerably, so the rates are averaged around 16.5%. So for our non-certified staff, we pay 16.5% on top of their salary for retirement benefits. The teachers' retirement system, the rates will not be finalized until next month, but the range is 9.5 to 10%. That's down slightly from 10.11%, which was last year. And then FICA, so we also pay 7.65% on salaries for FICA contributions. That rate, so there's a maximum, a FICA max, that max has gone up considerably, over 5% this year. So that's going to also increase those costs as well. Next, special education placements. We are expecting, thanks to our wonderful assistant superintendent for pupil personnel services and the programs that she's establishing, we are expecting those costs to remain stable. Remember, those costs can fluctuate more than almost anything in our budget. Here we go. Expenditures, okay. BOCES, admin, capital, and service cost increases. So we were presented with BOCES budget last month, I believe, and we are looking at approximately 3.5% increase in administrative and capital cost services. Career and tech, so our career and tech program is based on, I think it's a 3-year rolling average with 5 data points. So districts in the past would have a lot of students going to the program, and then the next year would have none. So it was very difficult to project these costs. So with BOCES, they established this 3-year rolling average. So this year, is a very good year for us. The increases to CTE are going to be, very minimal. I think they're gonna be up between 1% and 2% based on, that 3-year average. Utility costs,
But
yeah,
just to be clear, that's a per student cost. So if we have the same number of students, we're gonna go up 3%. If we have more students who decide to take advantage of CTE offerings,
no, that will not, it will
Oh.
not be based on enrollment. So the enrollment, this year's enrollment will become a data point within our
Okay.
3-year average. But we will not pay actual costs for each and every student that's going this year. It'll be that 3-year rolling average with the data points, and it's
So-
5 or 7 data points.
so therefore, if the number of students decrease 3 years from now, we will be paying
Less.
we'll be paying a higher per pupil cost because it's the 3-year average. So next year, let's say we have 100 students who are using the program, next year there are 50, we're gonna be paying more until that average works
Correct.
its way through. Okay.
Utility costs, we're expecting increases to utility costs, even though our solar is generating an enormous amount of power. We are going to be opening up Spencer Field, full lighting. There will be far more building use than we've had in the past 2 years due to construction, so we're estimating increases there.
And when is, I'm sorry, just to remind me, our energy service contract goes through,
Will we have 2?
right,
One is falling off in a couple of years and one is here for 20+ years, I believe, yeah. But we will probably be looking at a new
a
energy.
new one, yeah,
performance
because I knew one was falling off.
Yes, yes. So we made tremendous strides in the area, like there's only so much you can do, but the last one was a big
It
one.
was a good fit.
Yeah, very, very efficient. Debt service increase, so debt service is increasing by close to $1 million this year. Though that will be offset by some state aid, it is still an increased cost to our budget. Technology upgrades to infrastructure, new spaces within our new areas of our building, and of course, our 1-to-1 program. So next steps. We are going to analyze and update state aid projections, implement our collective bargaining agreements, and project our salaries out into our budget to see where we stand. Review and update enrollment projections, assess staffing needs and potential retirements, incorporate instructional initiatives and priorities by, meeting with our building leaders and looking at budgetary requests and really prioritizing those as far as what will bring the most value to our students and our districts. We will determine our transportation replacement needs for our propositions in March. And then a big part of this process is really assessing our current year performance as far as fund balance and expenditure projections. Because remember, the budget is really projected a year in advance, so we want to say, okay, last year, these were our projections, really, where do they stand? And then reassess at that point. So our budget presentation schedule begins with this evening, where we reviewed our revenues and expenditures. And then in February, the first February meeting on the 13th, we'll have a revenue budget summary, followed by our second meeting in February, where we'll do general support, operations, and present our propositions. Then March 13th, we'll do vision map, technology, and athletics. And then on the 27th, we'll have our school building budgets, curriculum and instruction, and our pupil personnel budgets. And in April, the superintendent will present a proposed budget, followed by the budget adoption and our property report card adoption. And we'll also be approving BOCES administrative budget. In May, we'll have our public budget hearing on the 8th, followed by a vote on the 20th for our budget, trustee elections, and tenure. Stay connected. If you have any questions about the budget, budget.questions@chufsd.org. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, just open it up to questions if anyone has any.
One relatively simple question, I hope. You said March 13th, there'll be a presentation on the vision map portion of the budget. And then 2 weeks later, there'll be the school building budgets and the curriculum and instruction. What's the difference between the vision map presentation and the more particular curriculum?
The vision map is really just framing the
Okay,
budget.
so it's really just framing for what we will be discussing that day and what we'll be discussing 2 weeks after.
So it
Okay,
gives me a chance to say what I always like to say, which is budget process is not just about dollars and cents, it's about vision and values. And so we know that the budget process is a time when a greater segment of the community perhaps is paying attention, is locked into what the. So we want to use that as a time to talk about the vision map and the longer term vision for the district.
Thank you, Denise. Question on the revenue side. How will the proposed housing developments impact the district's revenue?
So this year, we have one pilot from the previous year's development, which is about 44,000. That pilot was implemented last year. The housing developments themselves, next year, it will not increase the revenue that the district receives. The district has to adhere to the allowable tax levy, which doesn't allow us to deviate from the formula or exceed that revenue base by 2%. What it will do is it will reduce the taxes for the existing residents. So if we get $40 million in revenue and we have 5 massive developments that go on tax rolls, we still get $40 million. There's no change to our bottom line as far as revenue. It just distributed amongst the existing residents.
So additional housing within the district won't increase school district revenue, it'll just lower residents' taxes because we're allocating out the tax base across on a larger. On more residents.
Yep.
Okay.
And got it. And am I correct to understand that is actually the purpose of the tax-based growth factor to account for increases in the actual built supply of housing and its value?
Yeah.
Not that it actually does,
yeah,
but that's what it's intended to do.
It is. That is a portion of it, but again, the tax-based growth factor, the most money it's ever generated, and that's a factor that's applied to every school district every year. It goes up and it goes down. It is a fraction. It's anywhere between $20,000 to $120,000, maybe 200,000. In a rare year. So it again, it's insignificant. If we, I've never seen that number move more than 0.002.
No, I understand that, but it is a 1% increase in the tax levy each year, plus or minus whatever however it changes. but that is still a growth versus the prior year. Yes,
Yes,
right, so if the allowable growth levy factor is 2%, capped at 2%, which is what we expect it to be this year. Because inflation was, the CPI was greater than 2%.
Right.
And the tax base growth factor is, let's round it off to 1%.
Mhm.
So it's the 0.004 doesn't really mean very much. So call it so that totals out to 3%, gross approximation, 3%. That means that our total revenue from taxation is gonna increase
No.
by.
It's not 3%, it's multiply the two, let us say, by 1.004. Or
So it's
1.010, or whatever so it's.
Oh, so
2%.
Okay, so that's not added to the growth levy factor, it is a factor of. Oh my,
That's
Right.
why it's a factor.
Which is why
When,
the district doesn't get
yeah.
much revenue with.
right, got it, okay,
But
understood.
the one thing to add is that, like any other construction, during the term of the construction, the assessed value of whatever's being constructed is gonna be pretty low until it's done, and then it's gonna be reassessed, like when you add an addition to your home, or when your home is vacant as you're rebuilding it, you get a very low,
When you get your certificate of occupancy.
and then you get your C of O, and they do the inspection, and all of a sudden, they come in and the assessment goes up. So while we will not have, if there is, for example, lot A development going on, during the time that that's going on for the next year and a half, however long it takes, we're not gonna get much more in the way of tax revenue out of lot A. We're also not gonna have any residents in lot A. And then once lot A has a C of O, it'll be assessed. And then, that will be on the rolls, which will not increase revenue. As you said, nothing increases revenue, but redistributes the tax burden differently among all of our taxpayers. The one way that you could, not necessarily in our community, have a increase in a tax, in tax growth factor that would not just be a redistribution, is with non-residential construction. Because, for example, if someone built a 20-story office building on a plot, right? Nobody's living there, and then so that would create a lot of increase in
Brick and mortar.
the brick and mortar, and therefore the factor, but it wouldn't increase our student population.
Speaking of increases in student population. Do we have any sense of what the trend will be next year? Are we expecting an increase, and do we have any idea of how much yet?
we're expecting an increase, but we don't have any solid numbers at this point. We're evaluating our incoming preschoolers and kindergartners, and, every year there's an adjustment with incoming students in certain grades, like.
We have a sense of order of magnitude. We do know there have been at least one new development is open now and is now has occupancy. Right? And do we have any idea of what we're expecting relative to that? Yeah,
Yeah, we're
Currently
at
8 students, 8
Okay.
to 9 students
Thank
have
you.
newly registered for that particular
From
development.
Maple Commons?
Yes.
Does anyone remember
Spread
what
of
the consultant had said what that number would be?
Yeah, it was between 6 and 8, I think. It was.
I believe it was 5.
It was 5.
Yeah.
it's a little bit higher than
And I don't mean
expected.
to splice numbers, but that's also not the number of potential students that are living there, right? Because there's some question as to whether there's school age children that are living there that are perhaps still residing in their
Or attending
former
the
districts.
prior district?
And it could potentially still make a shift here at some point.
understood.
So the potential is, we
Yes,
know the actual
great, great.
potential is greater than.
Even so, we're not talking about a vast influx.
Not at this
And when you spread that out across 13 grades. That's
Yeah, but I don't think you can really spread it,
Yeah.
because you might have five students.
it's
or four
entirely
grades.
yes.
So we don't know, that's,
Entirely possible, but
yeah,
but
so
we're-
the argument that some make, that you're gonna get 50 students, so that's like 2 per grade. Doesn't make a lot of sense if 20 of them are gonna be in one grade, it doesn't happen that way, and you never can tell. And we also, although you mentioned 8 or 9, we don't know, perhaps we can find out, or we'll find out, how many preschool age students are living in Maple Common, who 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, will become.
that would be
old
very
enough.
interesting.
But, those things happen, it's the same thing when someone buys a house, and, my neighbor down on the corner has a child and just had another child, well, that's the way of life.
I think, the village consultant, whatever the measure they had assumed, number of students that would be attending the district. Coming out of the factor they had used in their calculation for Maple Commons, I think ended up being 2 to 2.5 times greater in actuality. So just something to think about as, the village is considering, well, A, that, one, there will not be additional revenue to the district from that building, and that there's potential significant costs that would be incurred.
I have 2 questions. The first is, in terms of potential development in the community, it's my understanding, or I've been told, that having an anchor property, which would then increase brick and mortar, could somehow offset, could you speak to that, or that would not?
An anchor property?
Like a commercial property at the base of like a residential building,
Another
Like a
shop
mixed use.
set.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry,
mixed use property.
right.
And
yes.
I don't think that would have any impact other than not increasing enrollment, just reducing our exposure to enrollment increases. I don't think it would have any other impact
Okay.
on the levy.
Thank you. And then my other final question is, I know that there's a difference in terms of how this district does budgeting versus how the village does budgeting. Could you just speak to that to clarify?
So I'm not very clear on how the village does budgeting, but I don't know, maybe you can.
Well, just in terms of like us and our tax levy, like sometimes they will exceed their tax levy and we
Yeah.
do not do that,
No, we do not, nor have we ever.
right?
So,
Because
we
it was-
always say, we are more obligated than them to stay within the levy. I think they have a lot more latitude than school districts.
The
Because there was-
villages,
Sorry, there was a point that was made at some point with regard to potential funds that would be available, the 192,000 in taxes that would be available, property of Lot A. And the argument was made that we as a district could potentially reach some of those funds if we pierced our tax levy.
Say that again?
That's what.
Well, yeah, let me just say, we
Am I wrong
could,
on that? That's what we
Yeah.
were told.
if
Yeah.
in fact. This board decided to ask the voters to approve. A tax levy of exceeding the tax levy cap. On the rationale that new construction. Was going to increase. The assessed value of everything in the community, and therefore. That's a way to quote, capture some of that. The only way that works is if the community says, okay, we will approve. A 2.7% tax levy increase, which is above what we would. Be entitled to do on a simple majority, we'd have to get 60% of the voters one of the differences with the village is they just have to get 60% of the 5-person board, which means as long as it's a 3-2 vote, they've met the obligation that they need in order to exceed the tax levy cap. But we can't just, say, okay, we're gonna raise $192,000 above the tax levy cap and say, oh, we can just do it. We can do it if we go for an override. And if we go for an override, it's not based on anything else other than we think that's how we're going to quote capture this money, which I don't think we would. And as we've talked about in years past, and you'll talk about in March and April, what happens if your budget goes down and you go to a contingency budget? It's not a way to.
No.
That's not a way to do your budget.
To try to capture money, that's
Right.
not really.
I will say that historically, probably 10 or when the tax levy cap legislation was first enacted, and we were going through this analysis with one of your predecessors, we, as a board, did talk about whether it might be necessary at some point to ask the voters to override, because inflation at that time was so great and the cap was 2%, that we just felt or were thinking that in long-term fiscal planning, we could not sustain the tax levy cap without having to cut programs. Fortunately, as a board, as a district, we never got to that point, and it is certainly my hope that we never get to that point anytime in the future.
It's an important clarification, I think, just to point out that historically we have not done this.
Right.
And also to point out, I think, just for anyone who's listening to this, it does require a significant majority percentage in the community to approve it.
I will also add that the 2% tax cap does not always equate to 2%.
Right.
In the levy projection, it's a prescribed formula, and if you are within that formula, the percentage can vary. There were some districts, I think, that their tax cap was 0 because of the formula, and others that it may be 5.2% tax cap. So just remember that we are within the prescribed formula, not exceeding that.
And I know that the fact that we have a pilot, which is now on the books, which factors into that, what is it, you knock off the prior year's pilot and add the current year's pilot or vice versa, is gonna make our computation even a little more complicated than it has been in years past.
This year it'll sort of balance it out.
Yeah, it'll
It's
sort of
actually
balance.
gonna be a little
bit.
off. It's
Yeah.
gonna be a little off because the projected amount was slightly higher than the actual amount, so there's gonna be a little variation. Insignificant, really, not material.
Right, but so when you show that chart, it's gonna be there. You're gonna say, look at this number, it's just another number, and you gotta like.
Yeah.
You take the pilots off and then you apply the growth factors and then you put the pilots back on.
Yeah,
Right.
you take the prior year and then the current year.
You do the hokey pokey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's the budget dance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Thank you. I know that those were a lot of questions that were related to your presentation, but we appreciate having you and being able to pick your brain on all things budget related. Just what, for a point of reference, so in looking at Maple Commons, it looks as though we have 6 preschool age students in that. That are not yet enrolled in pre-K.
They're aged 2 to 4 currently, based on this report, which was published in September of 2024.
So in 2 years, we'll have 14.
Potentially, yes, but there's only 13 of the 23 units that have school-aged or preschool-aged children. So there's 10 that are either not occupied or solely adults with no children occupying those units. And that was based only on what the village provided us back in September. But again, just to reiterate, to date, 8 students have enrolled as full-time school-age students to date from Maple Commons.
And 6 preschoolers
Are
in the waiting.
around.
Yeah, 14 is a very different number from 5.
Do we get those as occupancy changes? Or you updated on an annual basis, or is that just the initial rollout?
The initial rollout, if there's any change in occupancy within the village, they would have to
Just
update.
register, yeah.
Right, and then if they in fact move out of district, we would get notice from previous, pardon me, from the receiving district that this child is now enrolled, so we know that we, and their enrollment here in Croton. So there's some checks and balances,
Sure.
as long as they stay within New York State, but sometimes.
Yeah, but we wouldn't get updates from the village
No,
that
no.
if any changes, it would either come through enrollment. or
Yeah.
disenrollment.
So is that what we're looking at potentially in the future, that when a new residential development opens, you get the initial numbers, or is that just this particular?
I think it's just this development, because of the structure of the development, so. There was a lottery, so we were able to get a lot of information from the village based on the lottery. If that is not the case.
It's just private development, you wouldn't know, right?
Did I remember the numbers correctly? So you said 8 elementary school?
That was across grades, from kindergarten through senior, fourth grade,
okay.
yes. So that was distributed amongst all 3 schools, and I don't know the ratio per building, but it was distributed amongst all 3.
Are we still on track to be able to, for that demographic study that's overdue to us to come sometime this winter, do we think?
Yes, we are.
Great, that's good to know.
So it looks like we have,
It's calendar, isn't
pardon?
it? Isn't it calendar for a future meeting?
I thought we were still waiting on the results.
Yes, no, I believe we have a date.
A promised date, we haven't received it yet, it's a
Okay,
promised date.
So it looks as though we have 2 in the elementary, 4 in PVC, and 2 at the high school.
Any more questions? Thank you so much, Jane and Rachel, for those numbers on that slide. Moving on to new business. Item 3.1. Tenure recommendation, Rachel DePaul. I will turn it over to Superintendent Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, and certainly we'll have a chance to speak in greater depth and length about Rachel's leadership and accomplishments when we celebrate all of our tenure conferees in May, but I just want to say that certainly it's customary or it's tradition that when we reach this point in a person's career, we wish that person congratulations. And on behalf of everyone in the school district community, we certainly wish you that. But beyond that, I also just want to take this opportunity to say thank you. You are a remarkable leader and a truly remarkable person. And the fact that you've chosen to share your talent, your time, your vision, your passion, your love for the students and their families of this community with this community is an incredible gift that you give every single day to the people who work with you. And on behalf of so many families that may not be in a position to say thank you, I say thank you for that. I say thank you for being an exceptional colleague, a remarkable leader, a friend, and a member of what's become a family, I think, for all of us. I say thank you for that, and I say thank you for the genuine honor and privilege of getting a chance to recommend you for tenure. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Rachel, I just want to say on behalf of the board, on behalf of all the parents and the students in our school district, thank you, because everyone sees how much you care, how hard you work. We are so very lucky to have you there. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
We
Well, you
need
gotta
to
do
vote on
that.
it.
And we also need to know when we have the roast.
We had it already listed.
Get people lined up. Sell tickets to that.
Recommended action, be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, Board of Education hereby grants tenure to Rachel DePaul, Assistant Superintendent of Pupil Personnel Services Tenure Area, Berlin Harbin, Union Free School District, effective January 20th, 2025.
So moved.
Sarah's first. On the question. All in favor? Opposed, abstained, motion carried. Thank you.
Hi, Ray. Hi, Cheyenne.
My husband
Thank you.
enjoyed it. Yeah, my husband enjoyed it.
For policies for first reading. I will refer to the chair of the policy committee, Mr. Neil Haber.
On-
I know that you don't like to speak a lot.
No, I know, it's hard. On December 17th, the policy committee met, went through a variety of different policies. All of these are business office related policies that were reviewed and discussed with the assistant superintendent for business. You will see they relate to revisions to the purchasing policies, purchasing authority, some revisions relating to transportation of non-public school students and what the rules are to update them, and changes to conform with federal law concerning alcohol and controlled substance testing. The policies of many districts on that subject relate to bus drivers, because our bus drivers are required by federal law to be tested regularly for use of controlled substances. But our policy also has been written to include any other drivers of vehicles that are above a certain weight class, so that they must be, those drivers are also subject to testing. I think the changes are pretty self-explanatory, but if there are any questions, certainly it can be posed to the policy committee and or to assistant superintendent of business. I will say I got one comment from the board member sitting to my right. A typo, and it has been.
Nice
So, do I just move on? Do we have to vote on this?
No, unless anybody has any questions they want to ask now.
Well, if they have any questions, they can email the policy committee.
Right, but if there are questions you want to air publicly, now's the time to do it. Or
Why will versus shall? I'm kidding, I'm kidding,
why will?
kidding.
No, that's a serious question.
But not for this meeting. at
No,
this
no, I
time
just want to
today.
say,
I appreciate that.
NISBA, for some reason,
Changed.
changed will,
Yeah.
shall to will in all of their policies. I have asked NISBA's policy services why, they don't have good reason, but that's what they say, so it's kind of fit their style.
Thanks for clarifying.
Moving on, item 3.3, the tax certiorari settlement improvement. Recommended action be resolved that the Board of Education hereby approves the proposed settlement for the tax certiorari of matter of South Riverside Croton LLC versus assessor of the town of Portland and all as presented.
So moved.
Sarah, so moved.
One more second.
Omar, second. On the question,
Yeah, just one thing, and it's a point of clarification or just, I think the public should be aware, is that assessments such as this assessment for which there was a tax cert petition filed. Assessments are done by the town. The
the town of Portland.
town of Portland, if it's in that Portland or town of Yorktown, if it's in that particular district. The district, as a matter of practice for the last 10, 15 years, has participated as a party in those lawsuits and has reviewed and agreed to the settlement. That's not necessarily the case for small claims cases where a homeowner will go and seek an adjustment in their assessment, even if that will get to the point of filing a small claims action in Supreme Court. But we are involved in those tax cert cases and negotiations, and, you know, are able at times, at least in my experience, to effect modifications that are of a benefit to the district in, you know, in the settlement process.
Thank you. Thank you.
I will just
And
add that you'll also see a budgetary adjustment in the consent agenda that allocates a portion of our tax cert reserve to offset those costs.
how much remains in the tax cert reserve after the payment of this? I'm reading this correctly, approximately $32,000.
Yeah, our tax cert reserve is considerably higher. It's in I believe the 2 million range.
Okay,
But I think these for points of clarification so that people don't think they're stashing money, that the amount in the reserve is based on, represents an estimate of what our potential liability is, not made by you, but made by our council and by our public account. So it's not like we're sticking money there. It's like that money is there because we have claims or potential claims that have been asserted that connect to that amount.
Right. If you recall,
Budgeting.
if you recall,
It was
approximately, yeah, and we reduced that based on the assessments and our liability. So we do look at that every year.
And just as a matter of history, a number of years ago, almost 20 years ago, there was a major tax certiorari brought by Hudson National with a significant lowering of their assessment. And our district was required to come up with $1.8 million to refund to Hudson National. And so part of this process is to ensure that we don't have to find that money or borrow money to, you know, at an interest rate to pay those charges, if you will. So this is really part of our, you know, responsibility for the district in its finances.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Moving on to donations. Recommended action, be it resolved that the Board of Education gratefully accepts a donation from the Croton Harmon Education Foundation in the amount of $2,719.84 for the procurement of 3D printers in order to engage students in designing digitally and prototyping physically.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So where do we have any information on when where these printers are going to be deployed?
Yes, 12 to PVC and 4 to CET. This is on behalf of the granting Mark Malloy and Ashley Lover.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So on that, you said 12 at CET and 4.
Nope. Wait, it's what, 12 at PVC, 4 at CET.
So that's 16
16.
printer, is 3D printers for a cost of less than $3,000.
These are smaller
scale
scale devices meant for sort of smaller, quicker prototyping.
Okay, but even so, that's.
Yeah, the price.
Yeah, that's.
You couldn't
price used to be,
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Donations 4.2, recommended action be it resolved the Board of Education gratefully accepts a donation from the Croton Common Education Foundation in the amount of $2,613.42 for video production in the innovative learning spaces at Croton Harmon High School.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. And donation item 4.3, recommended action be it resolved the Board of Education gratefully accepts a donation from the Croton Harmon Education Foundation in the amount of $2,122 for one poster printer.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
Just a question, on this, if you know, is this poster printer for the use of science research and similar presentations? Because I know
It's similar to the one that Mr. Keen has here for science research. This is also on behalf of Mark and Ashley, so for use in Hindi and ER.
Oh, so this. Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. And as always, we want to thank the Croton Harmon Education Foundation for their continued support of innovation in our district, of our students' needs and interests, and of our faculty and staff's needs and interests, and their collaborative work is just beyond remarkable. So grateful. So thank you very much. We are then going to move on to our consent agenda.
I'm sorry, before we move on to the consent agenda,
Yes.
all of these devices have a requirement for consumables. Ink, paper, filament. How do we is that just budgeted out of a regular supplies budget? Added on?
At the building level.
Right.
The building level, right?
It is something that we need to think about because cost of consumables for this is not insignificant.
Well, the chef application, I mean, at least when I was on the chef, where the chef application requires a building level administrator to sign off on it, so it's done in consultation with.
Understood. Just look at it, it's not an argument against
No, I
it,
understand.
it's just something that we need to think about in budgeting. That to make sure that we account for, try to have a projection for the cost of these the new consumables. That are out there, especially when you talk about 3D printing. I'd say that you have overall, you have maybe a 15% hit rate in terms of usable product. And the rest is filament that you toss and hopefully gets recycled. But you can't. The machine to convert that used filament to shred it and turn it back into usable filament is not something that we have in is a capital expense that we probably wouldn't be doing. Okay. But it's something to think about.
Well,
And I would also hope that we're participating in recycling programs around those consumables because there's recyclability for many of these things.
and I'm assuming we'll be able to talk about that when we have the building budgets.
Action item 5.1, approval of the consent agenda. Be it resolved, the Board of Education hereby approves the consent agenda items as presented.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Everybody.
Aye.
Abstain? Motion carries. We will now move into our second hearing of the public. Again, I'll just repeat that all speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. They should say their name and Croton Harmon School District address. Comments must be addressed to the Board of Trustees, and comments about a specific person, staff, student, or Harvard district resident are prohibited. Please step to the podium if you'd like to speak.
This recommendation is that most people do not use the microphones effectively. Much to the chagrin of the public and the technician who had their backups provided. Chairman did effectively at all times. Mr. Hager did. In reference to policies regarding students and health, in the distant past, 2 years ago, I heard in a public meeting, I heard two board members discuss. There's a number of issues, medical issues with a student that would crop up in school that they would not inform the parents about, or be reluctant to inform the parents about. Let me say this. If a medical issue, whether it be mental, social, or medical, you better get a lawyer and go to a judge and get a judicial bypass. Because you don't know the unintended consequences if you're not informing the parent. And that really shook me up, and I spent 2 years wanting to say that. Item two. I'm worried about your high school history and English departments. When I heard that presentation, I was shook up. One, the list of books that they're reading, and then the interaction with the history department, how they interpret that. And then I heard what the teacher was about to say. And I believe that in this school, because it's so mostly progressive students in the school in the liberal community, that the events of the last 5 years in terms of censorship, terrible medical policy, COVID policy, silencing people on media will never be addressed because it was instituted by the left wing. And I worry about that. And I was shocked by that presentation. But 3 things quickly. This year, 2025, is the 50th year of the Vietnam War. Those veterans, so I know there are 15 combat veterans that were in this town, are now in their 70s, some in their 80s. As witnesses for your students, they'll be gone soon, so you're going to make use of that. It's also the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War, in which took place, many of the most important events took place within 50 to 75 miles of where we sit. And one of the most important participants in that process is a Black soldier up here, which we're having difficulty doing research, which shows all the difficulties of historical investigation. And lastly, this school, when you're dealing with prejudice and Holocaust, this school has graduated a refugee from the Cambodian Holocaust, which you should make use of when you deal with these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? We will close the hearing of the public and move on to action item 6.2 for reports. Ms. Shaker-Rosa, I'll start at the bottom. We'll start with the ad hoc committee on social media policy.
The ad hoc committee on social media policy and policy 105, the diversity, equity and initiative, inclusion and accessibility policy met on December 20th. We discussed various changes and revisions to the draft, which has been revised several times, many times since we started our work in 2021 and then continued in 2022 and 2023. The members of the ad hoc committee, which is myself and Josh and Theo, were members of the policy committee in 22, 23, and 23, 24. And the ad hoc committee was established simply because we had worked on this for a long period of time. And the board felt, and the president in exercise of the authority that the president has, established the ad hoc committee just so we could finish the work on that. The status with regard to the policy 10105, the diversity, equity, inclusivity, and inclusion matter and accessibility policy is, I think we are done. We are going to provide one last look and review by appropriate administrators and legal counsel to make sure there's no issues, and then that will be presented to the board. And the reason why you might not hear me so well is my thing keeps going off, and maybe presented at a meeting in the near future. Thank you. And as far as and with regard to the social media policies, we will be continuing to work on those at the next meeting. And it is hoped that after that meeting, we should have something ready to present to the board for first reading. After that, assuming that there's not more work that the board asks the ad hoc committee to do, we will have completed our charge and will be in a position to be disbanded.
I have a question. Does anyone else have a question?
Sure.
During that meeting, was the adoption or incorporation of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism discussed?
There was discussion of utilization of that definition. We haven't come to a final conclusion. One of the concerns expressed at that meeting and at prior meetings is the inclusion of the IHRA definition might result in a push, if you will, to provide definitions of many other potential or prospective areas of bias, anti-Asian, anti-Islamic, etc. And rather than creating a laundry list, so to speak, of different groups where the definitions will be stated in policy, I think it was the consensus of the committee, and my other members can chime in if they disagree, that it was felt better not to include that definition. It doesn't mean that the concerns about anti-Semitism will be minimized, just as the concerns of anti-Asian or anti-Islamic or anti-Catholic or any other type of discrimination or harassment or inequities in treatment would be minimized. And I think for myself that the policy, insofar as it talks about the kinds of things that we wish to imbue in our students, work with our students, imbue in our faculty, incorporates.
Social media, policy 0105.
I have no idea where you did that. I'm so sorry.
Workouts, a diligent brand. Copyright 10.
It's got a mind of its own.
But
Haven't done that, I still apologize.
so I think that, all of the things that we as a district will be working on, have been working on, and will be working on to deal with bias of any form is incorporated in the principles and in the language of the draft of 0105. Now, we will have the opportunity as a board, once It's presented for first reading to discuss, to, take feedback from the public and feedback from the board to make changes if, that is not clear, but I think that's how we looked at it with regard specifically to the definition from the IHRA.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Moving on to policy, Neil, you're up again.
I'm over again. Okay, policy committee, as you heard before, met on December 17th. As you said, our discussion primarily was on the subject of the financial and business related policies that we have on first reading. We will have some other policies in that area that we will continue to work on. Our next meeting is on the 29th of January. I believe that's a date that we have identified, and administration said they're available. That would be 5 p.m. at the district office. And the only other thing that I'll say is we had some discussion, but did not come to a conclusion with respect to the request by the board that the board and the policy committee consider the adoption of the alternate attendance or participation at board meetings remotely, where under section 103A of the public office law, a member of the governing body for extraordinary circumstances, as is stated, can attend without identifying that person's location and without inviting members of the public to be at that location for attendance at the meeting. The board, I think back in October perhaps, asked us to look at that again. The board prior years had decided it did not want to adopt that. One of the things that we noted in our discussion, but we haven't come to a recommendation yet, and I put it out there so that people may give it some thought, as we do, is that if the board adopts by resolution or by policy the alternate participation without identifying location, the statute requires that since members of the public will not be at that remote location, the board must provide the opportunity for the public to participate in, for example, hearing of the public in the same manner as if they were in the meeting. If under section 103, where their location is noted, if someone were to go to that remote location where that member is, then that person who is sitting in the room at the remote location would have the opportunity to say, during the hearing of the public, I would like to speak. And could speak because they're on camera, so to speak. But if we do adopt the alternate under section 103A, we are required to, in essence, have not just a live stream, but to have actually some kind of a interactive ability at the meeting, so that a member of the public from anywhere will be able to quote, participate during hearing of the public and otherwise. And that's something that we'll have to consider. There are technological issues to that. There are also issues with how a meeting is conducted. And in the end, we'll have to decide whether we feel that is something that we as a committee can recommend, and then ultimately what the board wants to do. I will just add that we have a large pile of policies that we need to churn out, which it's our intention to do so. So the fact you've got a half dozen or so, like this agenda, we're hoping on the next agenda, we'll have a bunch of others for first reading.
Neil, might it make sense for us to waive second reading for any of those, if there's anything that's ready to go? I'm just wondering if we can expedite the process for things that are simpler.
For the ones today, I don't think so. I think each of the ones that are here that we've already had first reading on today are things that do not have such an immediacy that we need to waive second reading. We can, when we consider them, see about waiving some of the others to expedite adoption. You know, generally, when our board policies were revised to allow for waiver of second reading, the concern was for those things that had such an immediacy.
Okay.
We really couldn't, you know.
I'm just saying, if there's any that do have immediacy, let's
Sure.
not forget that we have
Sure.
that tool in our belt.
Right, you will recall that I think it was last year,
No,
when the policy was changed, or the law was changed about single-use bathrooms had to be made available without regard to sex offender, and that law came into effect, 30 days after it was passed. We had to do that immediately because that was the law.
understood. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so communications met in early December. I don't, sorry, I have the off the top of my head right now. We continued working on the process and protocols. We talked about the meet the BOE and process protocols document for that. We do have a draft in place that will finalize and then circulate to the full board for review on that, hopefully soon. Along with that, you also saw that we are working on, we discussed last time, a chain of contact, flow chart of contacts. A draft of that has been produced and circulated to the board, so we will continue to discuss those in our next communications meeting. Among the other things we are currently working on as well is the intro and closing statement for hearing public. And then we are also looking at ways that we can increase our student participation and student recognition during our board meetings, bring some of that into our meetings. And that is the crux of the thing we're working on. Did I miss anything there?
No, the only other thing that I'm thinking is if we had in the budget, communications that we would want to put out. Maybe put that on our next.
Yeah, that will definitely be on the next agenda, and that's something we talked about at the end of the meeting. So for our next agenda, and I will be sending out a communication to everyone for availability for our next meeting, and I will likely invite Ms. Harrington to come ahead about it as well. So yes, so be on the lookout for that, and we will be continuing to work on these things and hope to have updates for the board.
Thank you, Sarah. Moving on to board development.
Yep, sorry, I try to get through this without having a coughing fit. I can't even cough, this is on. Is it? Okay.
Yep.
Sorry. My voice is definitely wearing out. Board of Development met December 12th, and there are just a couple of things that we wanted to highlight for the group. First is in committee, we did start to have a preliminary discussion about sort of our developing sort of like a methodology for and a way of thinking about board goals. One of the big things that came up in that conversation was considering multi-year goal setting so that we aren't necessarily under the same pressure to sort of establish new goals every year, maybe thinking of some things that can be ongoing.
sort of frees us up from sort of being on that very strict calendar of sort of setting goals every year and then trying to make them, you know, within like a discrete period of time. We have, as a subcommittee, sort of brainstormed some areas around which we think we could have further discussion. We'd like to actually bring this to the table for the next work session if there's room there. Honestly, at this point, like, I'm not sure. I think it's like the first week of February, and I don't know if we're really jammed up there, but that's like our next opportunity, I think, to have that conversation. So we'll talk to you, I'll see what's available.
So the January 23rd meeting, because it conflicted with the winter concert here at the high school and there's such limited parking and many of us are grateful parents, has been moved to the February 4th.
Right, that's what I was asking about, February 4th, yeah.
So that work session, we should be able to accommodate a conversation about.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I think that was essentially like what we sort of focused on in terms of what we'd like to accomplish. Other things that we are working on or beginning to work on are an onboarding guide for new trustees. We'll be working on that in committee. As sort of like a living document that can serve, you know, future trustees to come. We also talked about considering whether we need to have a spring retreat and what our sort of professional development needs are, and I think that's still under discussion. So when we next meet, we'll try to firm up some thoughts on that. We're also working on a couple of things that we owe to the full board, including a write-up of sort of committee responsibilities. I think we will see whether, you know, where the right place is to revisit that with everyone. And then we have let you know already that we've worked on a board development calendar, which you've sort of seen in email form. So that eventually, hopefully, we'll get into calendar form, so it's actually a little bit more useful and can be calendared and used year after year. So that's the report.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Next. We are meeting, Denise, we're still meeting in the.
No,
As well.
we're in the process of reevaluating or reestablishing that date for the audit committee. We have our auditors and the team, so I'm hoping by Monday we'll have a date.
Okay, I think the goal would be to, you know, have a meeting and report back at the next.
At the next business meeting, yeah.
That's it. That, advocacy.
Yeah, briefly, the last two topics of conversation in the advocacy committee have been the regionalization effort, which we discussed today, as well as the cell phone use policy at the state level. And we obviously talked regionalization today, look forward to just continuing to be connected there, understanding what's happening and using the committee as a resource as the district is engaging there. On the cell phone use policy, I've been monitoring any updates, chatter, et cetera, from Albany on the potential for
Correct.
did it go out?
Yeah, two of them have
Oh.
a bad batch batteries used.
Okay. Has been this one?
It's gonna be on right now.
Okay. Monitoring just any murmurings coming out of Albany. Yesterday was the first day of session, so not much happened aside from ceremonial things. The state of the state is happening on the 14th, where we might hear more about cell phone policy, maybe not. But this month is generally where we start to see rush of information on various policies at the state level. There was, I'll note, an article in late December where the governor was quoted as saying that this is not an exact quote, but is essentially signaled that her plan is to have a statewide policy on cell phone use, sort of a blanket statewide policy. No real indication in that article whether there would be any adaptations or allowances made for districts. But it was an interview and not anything very official, but just a note of one thing that was out there right before the new year. So I think we're just gonna keep monitoring what's happening in the next several weeks on this issue. And then decide, reconvene as a committee to decide next steps. And talk to you all about what's happening on that front. That's it.
Thank you. That concludes board reports. Moving on to item 6.3, fully of the board. Does anyone have any new nominations? Thank you, Sarah. Go ahead.
Okay, so just a couple of quick updates from both LHEC and WestPUT. So as you know, I serve on the steering committee for LHEC, which is the Lower Hudson Education Coalition. And our annual legislative forum, actually, WestPUT was kind enough to share that date because the LHEC's forum had to be canceled. It was initially supposed to happen today, which was going to be retreat time for our legislators. So January 30th is that date, from 7 to 9 p.m. I will be moderating that legislative forum with several regional colleagues, and look forward to as many people who colleagues here who can join us as well. It will be legislators from the 5 regions of LHEC. So that would be Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess, Orange, and Rockland counties. So we expect to have robust participation that night. So looking forward to that event. We in LHEC meetings and in WestPUT meetings have been, as of late, discussing the regionalization efforts, and also talking about some of the updates and things we've seen from the regions on the Blue Ribbon Commission. We're obviously anxiously awaiting the state of the state on the 14th, and then the governor is due to have her budget submitted by the 21st of January. So that'll position us well to sort of have that in hand for that legislative forum. And I think that's it, but yeah, busy advocacy time. So, and lastly, the advocacy priorities for WestPUT were finalized at our last meeting. So you can find those on the website, and they were also all emailed out mid-December to everybody as well.
Thank you. Josh?
Brief item. If I recall correctly, we we're still waiting to hear back from Con Edison on when they will be able to provide us with increased electrical capacity at the bus maintenance facility. Have we ever gotten an answer on that?
We have not. We're still waiting. However, the last update in the portal was that we are on their list for the upgrade related to this current capital project.
Right, so that's
One step.
we've been waiting on this for, I believe, over 2 years now, maybe 3.
Which is, if you see in the ESB report that I shared in my last weekly, that is one of the major issues that districts are having with implementing EVs, is that the electrical capacity, particularly, and we are in the heart of Westchester, so we're in a very.
Especially when you consider that it's really, Con Edison folks, if you're listening. It's only about 100 yards of additional line that you need to put in. Come on, get with the program. That's all I got.
Neil?
The PVC Building Planning Council did not meet this month. We were told that we would meet again in February, so I have no report on that. But I will report on Health and Safety Committee. Health and Safety Committee met on December 16th. we discussed a variety of different topics and subjects, including the construction and what was going on as far as our updates. And we discussed fire inspection, security camera updates to the buildings, AED boxes. So there are now AED boxes installed at all school fields. That was done back in September. We had a discussion about stop arm cameras. And during that meeting, there was a concern raised by members of the committee that the plan had been to install stop arm cameras on the external, outside the buses, as well as internal interior cameras that could be used by the district. And questions were raised as to whether that those internal cameras would be appropriate. After that meeting, the administrator who was in charge of the committee, that's Brad Kennedy, Director of Facilities, did further research, spoke with Denise and with others, and that work is still continuing. We met, again, not a formal meeting, on Monday. We did a walkthrough of the almost completed music room in high school and the almost completed guidance suite in PVC. We did not, we look, when we go through these walkthroughs, members of the committee will raise questions about safety concerns. That's the role, one of the roles. Health and Safety Committee, we did not see anything of concern in this walkthrough. The expectation is in the near future, those two facilities will be open, but I do understand that the music department in the high school has said, even if the music room is available, we don't want to move all our stuff out of the auxiliary gym until after our concert on the 23rd, so soon after the work will be completed, probably before then, and that space will be occupied. We also took a quick peek into the auditorium where work is progressing. I sure hope that everything will be done by April 1st. Well, actually, it's got to be done before that so you can do rehearsals. I'm not sure if that'll happen, but the work is progressing there. And that's what we did as a committee.
We actually received an ADA chairlift today, which was considerably earlier than expected.
Right, and one of the things they said in the music room is they really couldn't finish that because the lift to the stage is at the corner of the music room. So now that that's there, installation can proceed and hopefully be done soon.
Anyone else? Moving on to item 6.4, items needed for the next meeting. Anyway. Does anyone have anything to discussion item needed for the next meeting? My notes, always a good. And yeah, thank you. Item 6.5, recommended action, be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby adjourns the meeting at 10:16.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, or I'm sorry, on the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.